important because they affect all of us. All of us have roles. All of us are members of a family. All of us aspire to marry. All of us are married. All of the characteristics of these relationships spills over into the rest of our life. And so these kind of classes become very important, especially for sanctified people. Saved people are a little different than everybody else. We are governed by a different set of rules. Our rules of the word of the Lord. The Bible tells us how we are to conduct our affairs in church, outside of church, on our jobs, as we walk up and down the streets of the city. And so that's why we're having these Bible discussions on the family and the marriage, which becomes the core, as I've said in part one and part two, the core of society. Take away the family structure and you have no society. Take away the family structure, you have no culture. You have nothing but total chaos. You almost have what the animals would have, other than animals, for whatever God did with them, they even have family structure. They have a young, raise their young, teach their young, and then their young go and have their own family. So it's part of what God did to bring stability to the planet when he created Earth. And he put Adam over Earth. And he expelled Lucifer from heaven and put Lucifer on Earth for a minute until he put Adam over Earth. And then Adam was in charge of taking care of Earth until the Lord comes back again. As we know, he has not come back again. And so man still is responsible for the stability of the planet. And as you know, the family structure is completely falling apart in the times we live in America, and really around the entire world. Families have changed to the degree that it really is creating all kind of havoc in all other aspects of life and people's lives, just havoc. So these lessons are definitely good lessons to teach us how to be, what we should do as a family, as a marriage, as children, in the society in which we live. The first slide that is up tonight, and again, Genesis, the third chapter, is where we get the basis for the family. The biblical and divine purpose of the family. This is a quick review. To establish a covenant. The whole issue of marriage is covenantal. The covenant that two people make is really a covenant that's made between the two people and God first, and then made between each other in what becomes the relationship, which is called marriage. Will everybody marry? No, everybody won't marry. Will everybody's marriage last? Probably not, given the climate in which we live in. But it was this relationship that God created, and he created it not as just a partnership, but a covenant. A covenant is something that's not easily broken. A covenant is something that has some spiritual and divine elements to it. To establish the foundation of society. The family is the center of society. It is the core of society, and everything else really evolves around a family. Take the family out, we got trouble. Establish one flesh and monogamous relationship. Marriage should be based upon a monogamous relationship, meaning one man, one female, one husband, one wife. Now, that does not mean that people don't end up sometimes marrying 2 and 3 times. The Bible gives specific instructions for that. If somebody dies, according to the scripture, the person is free to marry again if they marry the Lord, if they're saved. What the Lord didn't want, it did not smile upon, was when we were in relationships other than monogamous relationship between the male and the female. Polygamous relationships, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, he was definitely against. Same-sex relationships, he is not for. Another reason for the purpose of the family and marriage is the procreation and reproduction. The Lord told Adam, as I had said last week in the 3rd chapter of Genesis, it's for procreation and reproduction. This is how the world was to reproduce itself. He told Adam to be fruitful and multiply. And from Adam's seed and Eve's seed comes the rest of the whole wide world, because that is the responsibility. That's how the earth replenishes itself, through procreation and reproduction. That's one part of a marriage situation, but it's not the total part, because then God goes on and talk about the relationship of fellowship and covenant that Adam and Eve was to have between each other, beyond the purpose of just procreating and reproducing. Procreation and reproduction of human beings should be done in the confines of a marriage. It should be. So we sanctified people still believe in those relationships, sexual relationships, intimate relationships between a husband and a wife. Anything outside of that, you frustrate the will of God. You frustrate, and it's tantamount to God being unpleased and unhappy, because the procreation and reproduction should be between a husband and a wife. That's how he created. Then he tells Genesis, he tells Adam to have dominance on the whole earth. Man was supposed to dominate the earth, and he has dominated the earth. He has captured the earth, and he's controlling the earth. No other animal on the planet has dominion over the earth like man has. Even though animals tend to be more vicious, that some of them are bigger than we are. Some of them turtles live to be hundreds and hundreds of years old. There was a time when there were giant animals on the face of the earth, but it was man that God gave the instructions to have dominion and covenant over the earth. It is amazing to me how an elephant that might weigh 1,000 pounds is led around by a man who weighed 25 pounds, because we are to have dominance over all of the creatures on the planet, over the giant whales in the sea, to the giant bisons that live on the plains in America, to the giraffes. We are to dominate, to keep order on the planet. That's what the purpose of man has been on this planet, to keep order. And we have kept order. We've kept order. The animals have not dominated, and they have not taken over. And animals are pretty okay as long as we don't move into their territories, and we stay off of what is rightfully theirs. You know, we capture them, put them in zoos and all that kind of thing. I don't know if the Lord is pleased with that, but he might not be pleased, but he might not be displeased. I'm just making a statement, but we are still to dominate and to control the earth. Then our job is to divine modeling. Man is supposed to model his behavior to the point that his progeny, his children, know how to conduct themselves, because they look at Adam and they look at Eve and they figure out how they should be, and they grow into adults being whatever their mother and father is. If you look at your own life, you probably are just like your mother and your father in so many ways. As you get older, the older you get, the more you realize. You think like them, you act like them, you respond like them. Now, some of the things that your mother and father did, you shouldn't be doing, but you also know that as you get older. You figure that's not good for me, so I'm not going to do that kind of a thing. But it is our job to model the kinds of behavior that adds to the stability of the society. And when the modeling is bad modeling, you know, you end up with bad human beings and bad people. 7 says to provide a means of completion. Part of the old idea of the family was, it was from within the family you become complete within yourself. You learn how to treat people, you learn how to respect yourself, you learn how to deal with your esteem. When you grew up in a house with brothers and sisters, you learn so much about human beings just by being in relationships with them, whether it's good or bad, because that's what the family's for. It's supposed to provide you with a means of completion and growing up. By the time you walk out that house with your mom and your dad and your brothers and sisters, I'm talking theoretically here, you should be able to walk like a man and live like a woman. By the time you walk out, they should have modeled for you in such a way that you should walk out. But we live in a society where you have many young people who leave the house at 18, 19, 20, 21, 25. They tell me that sociologically, people stay with their families down to in their 30s. There's a lot of reasons involved in that. I won't go in that. Some of it's economics, but people are maturing much later in life than they were years ago, when the behavior was taught to them how to be a man, A boy at 17 knew how to be a man. Not anymore. Not anymore. Uh, uh, Back in 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago, people married earlier. By 20 years old, a man has started his own family, has left his mother and father, and had his own house and own job. Not anymore. And they have children, but we're living in a situation where children are raising children, and there's no means provided for growth, development, and completion. Eight, the whole idea of a family is to provide nourishing and training for a child to become a man. Eagle stirs the nest is one of the most paramount examples. Eagle, mother eagle, she hovers over her eaglets until they're able to fly on their own accord. She takes them out of the nest from time to time, drops them in the air, swoops down under them. They fall on her wings, and then she takes them back up. She do that over and over until finally one day she swoops them down, but she don't catch them, and they fall. But then their little wings start working because they've seen her wings work, and they fly on their own. That's what a family is all about. We live in a time where you drop the child usually end up busting his head wide open because he hasn't been taught how to fly on his own, and he needs the help of the mother. We have a lot of problems with children in the times we live that's not being taught how to become adults because of what happens in their homes. The divine order for the family. Each family must be set in divine order. 1 Corinthians 11:3, Ephesians 5:22, 23. It's got to be according to the word of the Lord. Christ is the head man. The husbandman then must acknowledge the fact that Christ is the head. I'm talking about church-filled, Holy Ghost-filled people who want their families to work properly. The father in that house or the head of that house got to acknowledge Christ as the head. He is the head. Right under him is the husbandman of the house. Now, there are times when women have to stand in and be the head of the houses because a man don't happen to be there. So we're talking about principles as well as we're talking about actuality. Under the man is the woman. She is the wife and she is under him. You cannot get around scripture. I don't care how many the new women philosophers say that they're equal to men. Actually, they're not equal to men according to the scripture when it comes to God's divine order. Now, a woman is equal to a man when it comes to salvation. When it comes to those kinds of things, men don't get no extra points for being a man when it comes to who can be saved, who can't be saved. But when it comes, and this is in a family setting and a marriage setting, he is the head of the woman and she is under him. And the children are under her and him. And the children, Ephesians 6:1 says, must obey and respect the parents. Now, when this divine order thing works, it's perfect. When the system works, it is perfect. Now, again, when you talk perfection, you're talking about a lifetime. You're talking about forever. So it takes a long time for it to work. You who have been in marriage situation know that, my God, saying, Bishop, you're just talking and it sounds like it's easy. You don't understand. It is, as I said for the last two sessions, marriage is the hardest thing you can do, but when it's working, it's the best thing you can do. But when God intended for us to create a family, this is the order for which he intended for it to be. All right? This is how he intended for this thing to work out for us. Traditional Old Testament family models. The household was patriarchal. That means male dominated. If you go in the Old Testament, it was a patriarchal household where that man was supposed to be over his house. He was the center of the household, responsible for getting, instructing, disciplining, and nourishing his children. A man who cannot control his own house, according to the scriptures, is worse than an infidel. Having kids does not make a man a father. Having kids might be one of the most easiest things human beings can do, but that does not make a father. That man who is under Christ have to first, I'm talking about sanctified people here tonight, must first put God the head of his life so that those under him will see that and they will follow and support him. Her role is to help me. We talked about that last week in part 2. Her role is to help me. She's a supporter. She is an administrator. She's an intercessor. And her role is to do everything she can to help the thing go right. The key word here is to help, not to rule, not to even lead, if you really want to know the truth, but to help the thing go right. That means that whatever she's required to do, and I'm talking about within the realms of what is right and what is wrong. And I don't want you to think that if you're asked to do something you know is wrong, that's a whole nother issue. That means that the head is out of control some kind of way and it's not working properly. But when it works properly, her role is to help him. You help by saying, what do you want me to do? And then the person that you're helping says, I want you to open the door. And you help them by opening the door. All right? So she's a supporter. There's nothing stronger than a woman who supports her husband. There's nothing more powerful. The two together become one, and nothing can stop when that kind of relationship develops in a household. When they're on the same wavelength, on the same, on everything, on how to deal with the children, how to discipline the children, how to save money, how to whatever. When they're on the same wavelength, nothing, according to God's divine will for the family, can ever go wrong when you do it the right way. And you have ups and downs, there are going to be bumps in the road, but when the principles that I've outlined here are projected, it works. It worked. This is how the family worked in the Old Testament. This is exactly how it worked. The family model, the original model for the family was supposed to be the nuclear family, based on monogamy. That was Adam married Eve, and Eve and Adam had Cain, Abel, and Seth. And then, of course, as you read the scripture, book of Genesis, they had other kids too. Noah had his wife, I don't know her name at this point, but he had 3 sons, Ham, Japheth, and Shem. That was the nuclear family model based on monogamy, where Adam only had Eve and Noah only had his wife. As time went on, the nuclear family concept changed. Sarah talked Hagar into going into Abraham, and Abraham and Hagar had a son named Ishmael. And then we see the beginning inner workings of this thing called polygamy and concubines. But the Lord never intended for there to be polygamy or a concubine. He never intended for it to be. He only intended for a man to have one wife at a time. That's all he intended in order for the divine order. But they created this. Now, why did he let them do it? Well, the Lord let us do a lot of things that he did not necessarily intend, but because he loved us so, sometimes he steps back and then he says, well, you have brought this upon yourself. And since you brought this upon yourself, then you must suffer the consequences. Now, the consequences that come along with polygamy in humanity. Then came polygamous concubines household with Abraham and Sarah at Sarah's behest. Sarah thought she couldn't have any kids. In order to have kids, she went and found a concubine for her husband. Her husband, of course, said, well, if that's what you want, Sarah. And never the intent of God. It was an invention of man, which God then turned around and connected in the New Testament when he said the husband of one wife. So the practice was annihilated by the Christian church in the New Testament. And then Hagar's and Sarah's little arrangement turned into all kind of havoc. As you remember what happened, Sarah eventually threw Hagar out. The children that came from Hagar, which is the forerunners of what is now the Muslims, they resurrected the practice of polygamy. And then the Mormons, which are probably the more modern people who resurrected the practice of polygamy, they practiced polygamy up until, I think they still practice it. There's colonies in America now where there are polygamous relationships. God never intended. Look what happened with this whole issue of polygamy. David and Solomon are 2 great examples. They brought in women and married them and almost destroyed the whole nation of Israel because these women that they brought in didn't believe in God. They were pagans and heathens, but they were beautiful women that David and Solomon had got attached to, and they almost destroyed the kingdom. That's why in the New Testament, God said, that's it, no more of this polygamy and this concubine stuff. We stop it now. So you got a lot of people running around in many African cultures. They still believe in polygamy, but God stopped it. He didn't invent it. He didn't want it in the first place. All he wanted was Adam and Eve. But he said, that's it. We can't have that. So if you run into any saints or who believe in polygamy, you need to look at the scripture and say, no, I think God got rid of that. All right. The family life of Jesus. Here is an excellent model. Jesus' family was a blended one because we've talked about the nuclear family, but then there's this other concept which sociologists are calling nowadays a blended family because of what has happened to the family structure. Nowadays, you really almost can't have a nuclear family because you got so many people who have children who never married, but then they marry, and then they marry somebody else who got children. And there could be there could have been a death in one of the mates or something, or there just could be people just got children and they try to bring the families together. Now, when us sanctified people do that, we have to love the stepchildren as much as we love our own children. Because if you don't love the stepchild as much as you love your own child, you have no business being in a relationship because then you destroy the life of the child. And that's what happens to many families. They fall completely apart because they haven't thought out before they marry how serious it is when you're trying to blend two families to become one. It's already serious enough one family trying to become one. Jesus was the son of God and Mary. He was actually the stepson of Joseph. He was viewed really as an illegitimate child. But Joseph raised Jesus like he was his own. And it was a spiritual thing. But Joseph set this model for people who got to deal with stepchildren, blended families. Jesus was one of 8 children. If you read Mark 6:3, Matthew 13:55, Jesus had brothers, James, Joseph, Jude, Simon, and he had 3 sisters at least. And we don't know this because we don't do this kind of study. But Jesus was a blended, he was raised in a blended family. Joseph raised Jesus until he was a man. Joseph taught him how to pray. Joseph taught Jesus about the temple. He went to the temple. Every time Joseph went, he went. He was a carpenter because Joseph taught him how to be a carpenter. He was a trained, disciplined, raised to obey and respect and to love people. Jesus obeyed every rule that there was to obey until he became grown. He even went to the temple, and when he went to the temple, they lost him for a minute. They thought, so where you been? He was up there listening to the teachers, but he went back home with his father because at one time, went back with Joseph and Mary because it wasn't time for him to be on his own. When the time came, he went. When the time came, he was so well trained, so disciplined, raised rightly, obeyed, respect. That means that whatever discipline Jesus had to get as a boy, he got until Mary said, do whatever he tell you to do. Because there comes a time when the mother even have to give homage to the son. There comes a time when she recognizes my boy is a grown man now. And not only that, but one day he's got to be head of the house. I wish I had time to talk about parenting styles, but I don't. But I think y'all getting this pretty well. Rules revealed by marriage. Falling in love is one thing. Marriage is a completely different thing. Marriage is hard, and I add hard work. It takes a life commitment. Now, this section of the lesson is so good for single people because we got people in the church that want to get married, but we got people, saved people, who unfortunately don't know how to rightfully move in that kind of direction. And why? Because society is so confused about rules and regulations in regards to relationships and marriage until the core is falling apart and we're all suffering from the disintegration of the family. Falling in love is one thing. And I might add this, you're taking notes, write these words down, infatuation. Many times what happened to us, human beings, that we are infatuated with somebody and we're not in love with them. because love takes a lifetime and infatuation takes a look. All you got to do is look at a person, and if there's something about them you like, it can create an infatuation almost immediately, which we confuse with love. Marriage is a different beast. It takes commitment, hard work, painful work, long work. That's why the Lord says very clearly, makes it clear, until death do you part. You work this thing out if you're going to get in it, because the covenant is so strong. These are some of the traits that makes a good marriage. Good discussion here. Trust. That's the first one that I've listed. It leaves you with a sense of comfort and support. It's part of loyalty and commitment element. It's tantamount to accepting good and bad unconditionally. When you trust somebody, which has got to be part of the love relationship and the marriage relationship and the family relationship. Even when you raise kids, you even teach them to be trustworthy, and you teach them to trust other people, because it adds stability to a relationship. Does that mean that the person that you're in love with or that you are in relationship with will ever do anything but you question the trust factor? Yeah, you question it. But real trust, which takes time too, is part of loyalty and commitment, knowing that people are not perfect and will make mistakes. It is tantamount to accepting, trust is a tantamount to accepting the good and the bad unconditionally, which creates this thing called trust, which is center to creating a relationship with somebody. Because we live in a situation, as soon as the trust is gone, the person is out of there, which raises the whole issue of separation and divorce and all the other stuff. All because somebody just didn't wait a little while until the Lord helped them through whatever the difficult period was to realize this person made a great mistake, but I love them, because love says trust, and I just got to let God work this out. Living together, knowing that things need improvement, so important. If you're going to be married, and if that's the core of society, when you realize that nobody is perfect, you live together knowing that I need to be improved, they need to be improved, and it's going to take some time before the improvement comes. We're constantly in change. What you were when you were 18, you're probably not at the age of 40, definitely not at 50, and surely not at 60. You change all along the way. If you look at the decades of growth and development, every decade brings a change in a person's life. The mental state, the emotional state, the psychological state. And so if you changing, then that means the person that you with is changing. And that means you might have to accept something that you didn't accept 10 years ago, but you might accept now. You might have to, because this person's going through a change like you are, okay? Ignoring things that can't easily change. There's some stuff that you have to ignore. I was reading something a couple of weeks ago, and it says basically, it was so powerful. And if I could remember, that's my 7 decades where I'm starting to forget. I don't remember like I did remembered when I was 30 years old. So that means if you holding that against me, you got to realize, well, this dude don't got older now, so he ain't gonna remember. But I was reading this thing, and it talked about some things there's no resolution to. Some things you have to just let go because it's not going to change. Or if it's don't change, or if it's changeable, it's not easily changeable. They say you can't uh, teach an old dog new tricks. And I know that to be true. I had a blessed little dog named Alexandra. And as she got older, whatever I did not train or teach her when she was young, she couldn't do it. When she was little, she always went down the steps on the right side. So when she got older, I tried to teach her how to go down steps on the left side. She couldn't do it. So I finally said, well, go on down on the left side then, or the right side, since you can't do it. Same way with us. We got to realize that a lot of waiting is involved. Patience. James, the Bible says, let patience have her perfect work. Patience is something that is tantamount to creating a good relationship. If you don't have patience, and many people don't have patience, they want it now. They want it because I said that I want it. They'll never, ever have the kind of relationship that they should have. Forgetting and forgiving. And we could talk about this all day and all night. First thing I'll just say this, forgiving and forgetting, like all of the elements, are a process. It's something that you go through and you work through until you get it just right or get to where you need to be in a relationship. Now, when these things are working, what they create, as I said before, is the best relationship you can have with an individual. Right now, we're talking about spouse. When these things are all working, understanding needs and filling in space, it helps to see each other a separate human being that must be respected while trying to be one, dealing with differences. See, another thing about trying to create a proper relationship with somebody else, you got to remember that they're not you, that they're separate from you while you both trying to be one. That means that they're not going to think just like you think. They're not going to feel the same things you feel. You like spinach, they like artichokes. Okay. But you both trying to become one. You have to recognize and realize, let me give them the space to be who they are because I love them, not because they like artichokes, but for a whole lot of other things. All right. When we start trying to recreate somebody else, one of the problems many people have when they fall in love, they look at somebody's issues, their problems, and in the back of mind, they think I can change them. And when we get married or we get together, it's going to be different. That person needs a lot of counseling and a lot of help before they dive into a relationship. Because usually, even in the courting phase of a relationship, both people are putting on airs to win the heart of the other individual. Soon as they have won the heart, they go back to being who they actually are. All right. Now, who they are might not be bad. It's just they might not be exactly what you want. All right. Healthy habits, planting healthy seeds. Here's some things that kind of help us along our way. Speak that which is positive. How can you be in a relationship with somebody if you're always speaking negative stuff to them? Stop the constant criticizing or accusing. It develops into an addiction. If you accuse somebody all the time of something, it's just a matter of time that you're going to always accuse them. You ain't going to never believe them. Because what constant criticizing and accusing leads to is mistrust. And as we said earlier, trust is the core of a relationship. So speak positivity. You know, I'll try to find some way to let them know that, you're okay, you're fine, you know. Sow seeds, healthy seeds, rather than planting seeds. Learn how to communicate, talk properly, learn how and when to speak. Fight fair. Anger is a marriage killer. Calling names is a marriage killer. Complaining and comparing is a marriage killer. You can't complain all the time because this girl don't cook like your mama. She ain't your mama. You can't complain because this boy ain't like your daddy. He ain't your daddy. You see, and if you plant those kind of seeds, you're gonna be in an unhappy situation forever. You're gonna be stuck. One, because you saved and you can't just walk out, and two, you're gonna be miserable. One of the easiest thing to do is you start with yourself. Look at yourself and see who you are. And you realize that you need so much help and there's so much stuff wrong with you, then you easier can accept what's wrong with the other individual.
Man.
Hey, I'm almost finished here tonight. Bless y'all. Then you want to learn the art of listening. Anybody who's taken any counseling courses, and part of my background is in counseling and psychology and that kind of stuff, therapy stuff. One of the first things that you're taught is the art of listening. If you can't listen, you can't really help. And many of us don't listen. We out talk. Our mind is somewhere else. Everyone needs validation. We won't give validation. Everybody got to be confirmed. We won't give confirmation, acceptance, sensitivity, cooperation, partnering, and supporting. Human beings need this kind of stuff. But many marriages, many families are torn apart because we don't give. Even with children, you have to validate a child. You have to validate a child. Okay, so the child might not be smart as the kids next door, but you can't go around telling them that you ain't smart as that boy next door. You can't do that. You know, you got to find a way to validate whatever it is that the child is able and comfortable at doing. And you got to accept whatever it is until it gets better. Cooperation and pardoning and supporting is what makes a strong family unit. When you're cooperating and you're pardoning and you're supporting, you know, I wish I had time to talk about some modern day situations. I'll just use this, and whether you agree with me or not, at least think about it. President Clinton had a really rough time in his professional life, and y'all all know the story. But one of the things that helped him to survive those turbulent times was when Hillary Clinton stood by him. And I know that there's many women who would say she was crazy, da, 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 da. I would have left, and he wasn't no good, and he was a scoundrel, and all of this stuff. But she, I don't know if it's her Methodist background or upbringing, she stayed right there. He continued his presidency, ended up being one of the most popular presidents we've had, and she ended up being almost the president of the United States of America, because whatever was going on in the relationship, they had this thing about cooperation, pardoning, supporting, forgiving, validating, confirming, accepting, sensitivity, and work that thing out and through. Now, it had to be horrible, egregious times in their lives because they were public figures. So everything they did was on front page all the time. But somehow, this is what God wants from a family and a relationship between a husband and a wife. If you can just hang in there, you made this decision to marry. And you made this covenant with me when you did it. Mm-hmm. All right, let's go to the next one, Brother Kevin. We're coming along pretty good here, thank God. Overcoming anger. This is a big one. This is a big one. Because when you don't deal with anger in a relationship, you end up creating physical violence. Now, let me say this. Saints got no business fighting each other. They have no business fighting nobody, if you want to know the truth. But they have no business physically hurting each other. A man has no business at all putting his hand on a woman, much less his wife or his mother or his sister. Physical violence is never accepted. But Eve got no business putting her hand on Adam either. The Lord intended for both Adam and Eve to live in such a way where they didn't resort to physical violence. You don't pick up no chair and throw it and hit the person that you love. You don't take no dishes and throw them across the room. You know, you don't do that. Psychological abuse is just as bad as physical violence. That's when you end up trying to make somebody else think that they ain't nothing at all. And well, my comeback to that is, well, if they ain't nothing at all, how'd you end up with them? That must mean you ain't nothing at all. Verbal abuse. Sometimes we get in a situation where we just verbally try to beat each other down. One, because we know we saved, we ain't got the business fighting. So then we start telling each other how little we are, and we ain't this, and you ain't that, and if you was a man, and if you was the right kind of woman, it's too late, you don't got married now. Okay, and then I came up with this one. Now, physical, psychological, and verbal are three elements that you'll hear any counselor tell you. But then the Lord gave me this spiritual abuse. It's when you think that you're more saved than your companion is, and you bring it to their attention that they ain't saved. Who made you God where you starting or you're able to determine who is saved and who's not saved? You see, and bringing it to their attention that you ain't saved, or you ain't praying enough, or you ain't fasting enough. You know, if you were saved, you read your Bible more, or you shouldn't have did that. Spiritual abuse. We spiritually abuse each other. And these are all things that destroy our relationships. And what we forget is that our original relationship, our original covenant is with God before it even is with your mate, your companion in that relationship. Intimacy is key. Keep an intimacy alive. Show love. Express love. Be available. Gifts, gifts, gifts. You know how when you was going to somebody and call yourself liking them, you do anything in the world to make them think that you like them. You spend your money and the time, loyalty. Show appreciation. Tell the people you appreciate them as best you can. You might not use that language. For whatever reason, it seems like it becomes harder as in a marriage situation for you to show the kinds of appreciation that you should show. Okay. But these are the things that keep us in the right covenant relationship. The 60-40 rule, it's I give a bit more than I take rule. In other words, if you give more than you take, or you give more in the relationship than you demand, because if you try to do 50-50, well, I do this or she does this, or he does this, I do this, and leave you stressed out because you can't keep score when you're on 60-40 rule, when I'll do, then I want you to do, it creates the inner workings of a good relationship. Almost there tonight. I hope I'm helping somebody. Hope I'm helping somebody. I'm helping me if I ain't helping nobody else. Last word, take your time before marriage, during marriage, and to the singles, don't rush into it because it's permanent of a relationship. Never rush out of it because it's based on a divine principle of eternity. You see, that's how serious it is. It forms the basis for the core of society. Is that it, Brother Kevin? Okay, I think that's it. Until death do us part, it takes years to build the strong marriage that God intended for us to build. And he does intend for us to build it. The longer you stay in it, the stronger you become, the stronger it becomes, the stronger your family becomes, the stronger everything becomes. You'll save more money. You'll have more than you ever had when the two becomes one and work together. Questions, comments here tonight, sanctified people?